Johnny Carson was 3 minutes into his monologue about California traffic when a voice from the side of the stage said 5 words that made him freeze mid-gesture. "Hello, John. It's your father." The audience thought it was part of the show, maybe a surprise guest. But Johnny's face had gone completely white, his cards falling from his hand and scattering across the floor. The man walking toward him looked like an older version of Johnny himself. And when the Tonight Show host whispered, "Dad," before his knees buckled and he grabbed the desk for support, 300 audience members realized they were witnessing something that was never supposed to happen on live television. September 22, 1978. The Tonight Show was heading into its Friday night taping with the comfortable energy of a week winding down. Johnny had just finished a particularly successful Thursday show with Burt Reynolds that had the crew still laughing about stories from the Smokey and the Bandit set. Tonight was meant to be lighter. Tony Randall was scheduled to discuss his new Broadway show, followed by singer Melissa Manchester. Johnny wore his favorite blue suit with the silver tie, the combination his wardrobe supervisor said made his eyes pop on camera. The monologue was hitting perfectly. Johnny had opened with a killer joke about Jerry Brown's presidential ambitions, followed by a bit about Los Angeles finally getting rain after 3 months. "I saw 2 trees fighting over a dog," which got the exact rolling laugh he wanted. The audience of 300 was warm, responsive, ready for 90 minutes of comfortable entertainment to cap their week. Ed McMahon was in particularly good spirits, his laugh booming across the studio at every punchline. But there was something unusual happening stage left. The NBC pages kept glancing toward the wings, whispering to each other with expressions of confusion. Fred de Cordova, normally stationed in the booth, had come down to the studio floor during the commercial break before the monologue, having an intense conversation with someone just out of sight. Security seemed agitated, checking lists, making phone calls. Yet the show continued smoothly. Johnny was a professional who could deliver perfect comedy while the building burned down around him. The audience didn't notice the disturbance. They were focused on Johnny's bit about the new fall television season, how every show seemed to be a spin-off of a spin-off. "Pretty soon we'll have Fonzie's cousin's neighbor's dog gets his own apartment," Johnny quipped, getting another solid laugh. He was in complete control, that masterful Carson timing that made even mediocre jokes land perfectly. This was his element, his kingdom, the place where he'd been untouchable for 16 years. Nobody in the audience could have known that Johnny's older brother Dick had been frantically calling the studio all day, warning them about something, or that Johnny's secretary had been turned white by a phone call that afternoon, or that an elderly man had been sitting in the NBC lobby since noon, holding a hat in his hands, telling anyone who'd listen that he needed to see his son. "Hello, John. It's your father." The voice came from stage left, clear and steady, cutting through the laughter like a blade. Johnny's hand froze mid-gesture, his mouth still open from the punchline he'd just delivered. The cards in his hand slipped, fanning across the floor in a cascade of white. The audience, thinking this was part of a bit, chuckled uncertainly. A man stepped into view. He was perhaps 75 years old, wearing a simple brown suit that had seen better decades, holding a fedora in weathered hands. His face was Johnny's face, aged and worn. The same sharp nose, the same set of the jaw, the same eyes that had made Johnny Carson instantly recognizable to millions. But these eyes held something Johnny's never showed: vulnerability. "Dad?" Johnny's voice was barely a whisper, but the boom microphone caught it. His left hand gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles went white. His right hand went to his chest, as if checking his heart was still beating. Ed McMahon stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. "Homer? Homer Carson?" Ed had met Johnny's father once, years ago, at Johnny's mother's funeral. That was the last time anyone had seen Homer Carson near his son. The audience was dead silent now, realizing this wasn't planned. Several people recognized the resemblance. This elderly man looked like Johnny might in 20 years. The cameras kept rolling, the operators too stunned to wait for direction. Fred de Cordova was frozen in the wings, his headset hanging around his neck, mouth open. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," Homer Carson said, taking a step forward. "I know you don't want to see me, but I'm dying, John. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors say I have maybe a month, and I couldn't leave without—" Johnny's knees buckled. He caught himself on the desk, but his legs were visibly shaking. "You need to leave," he managed, his voice strangled. You can't just— 30 years, Dad. 30 years of nothing." Homer took another step forward. I know what I did, what I didn't do. But please, John, just let me say what I came to say." The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights, the distant traffic on Alameda Avenue, someone in the audience crying softly. 30 years, Johnny repeated, his voice gaining strength through anger. "You walked out when I was 25. Mom cried every night for a year. Dick had to drop out of college to help support the family. Catherine was 8 years old, Dad. 8. She used to sit at the window waiting for you to come home." Homer's composure cracked. I know what I did to all of you." "Do you?" Johnny stepped away from the desk, unsteady but moving toward his father. "Do you know I had to identify Mom's body alone because you weren't there? Do you know Dick's marriage fell apart because he became an alcoholic, trying to be the father you weren't? Do you know Catherine hasn't spoken to any man named Homer since, because she can't stand hearing your name?" The audience was witnessing something beyond entertainment, a son's 3 decades of pain erupting on live television. Several people had their hands over their mouths. A woman in the 3rd row was openly weeping, perhaps seeing her own family's fractures reflected on stage. "I was a coward," Homer said simply. "I was 38 years old with a wife and 3 kids, and I was drowning. The hardware store was failing. Your mother was disappointed in me. You were already funnier at 10 than I'd ever be. I felt like a failure in my own home." "So you left?" Johnny's voice cracked. "Your solution was to just disappear? I thought you'd be better off without me. Ruth had her family's money, while you were already getting radio work. Dick was smart. I was just— Wait." Johnny laughed, but it was bitter, painful. "Wait? You were our father. We didn't need you to be successful. We needed you to be there." His voice broke completely. "I did the Tonight Show for 16 years hoping you'd see it, hoping you'd call, hoping you'd be proud enough to come back." Homer's legs seemed to give out. He grabbed the guest chair for support. "I watched every night, John. Every single night from the beginning. I have scrapbooks, hundreds of them. Every article, every review. I even went to the Emmys once, sat in the balcony just to see you win." The revelation that Homer had been watching, had been there, but hidden, seemed to break something in Johnny. "You were there?" Johnny screamed, his professional composure completely shattered. "You were at the Emmys? You watched me win and didn't—" He staggered backward, his hand over his mouth. "Oh, God! Oh, my God, you were there!" Homer pulled something from his jacket, a photograph, worn and creased. "This is from that night, 1974. You won for Outstanding Variety Series. You thanked everyone except me, but at the end, you paused and said, 'And to those who couldn't be here.' I told myself you meant me." Johnny collapsed. Not dramatically, not for effect. His legs simply gave out, and he went down onto the stage floor, sitting with his head in his hands. The king of late night, The coolest man in America was sobbing on his own stage. Ed McMahon moved toward him, but Johnny waved him off, unable to look up. "All those Father's Days," Johnny said through his tears. "All those times I needed advice. When my marriages fell apart. When Mom died. When I didn't know if I could keep doing this show. I needed my father, and you were sitting somewhere watching me on TV." Homer knelt beside his son, this 75-year-old man getting on his knees on national television. "John, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm dying, and I needed you to know that every success you had, every laugh you got, every award you won, I was proud. I was so proud I couldn't breathe sometimes. You became everything I couldn't be. I became successful because I was running from becoming you." Johnny's anguish filled the studio. "Every joke, every performance, every moment of making people laugh was me trying to be worth something, so maybe you'd come back." The two Carson men were on the floor now, father and son, 30 years of silence between them, surrounded by cameras and 300 strangers. Homer reached out tentatively, his hand hovering near Johnny's shoulder, afraid to touch his son. "I'm sorry, John. I'm so sorry. I was a coward and a failure as a father, and I've regretted it every day for 30 years. But watching you succeed, watching you make America laugh every night, knowing I made something that perfect, you were my only good thing." Johnny looked up at his father for the first time in 3 decades, his face destroyed by grief, and whispered, "I would have traded it all just to have you there." Johnny suddenly grabbed his father's hand, gripping it like a lifeline. How long? How long do you really have?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. Johnny stood abruptly, pulling his father up with him. He turned to the cameras, his face still wet with tears. "We're stopping the show. I'm sorry, Tony, Melissa, but we're done for tonight." Fred de Cordova's voice came over the speakers. "Johnny, we can't just—" "We're done, Fred. NBC can run a rerun." Johnny's voice was final. He looked at the audience. "What you just saw? I'm sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen. This man is my father, who I haven't seen since 1948. He's dying, and he came here to—" Johnny's voice broke again. "And I'm going to spend whatever time he has left with him." The audience erupted in spontaneous applause. People were standing, crying, applauding not for a performance, but for a son choosing his father over his show. Ed McMahon was wiping his eyes. Doc Severinsen started playing Danny Boy softly on his trumpet, the Irish farewell that seemed to capture everything. Johnny turned to Homer. "Where are you staying?" "The YMCA on Highland." "No. You're coming home with me. Tonight. Right now." "John, I didn't come here expecting—" "Dad." It was the first time Johnny had called him that in 30 years. "You're coming home." The cameras captured them, walking off stage together, Johnny's arm around his father's shoulders, Homer leaning into his son. The show went to black. No credits, no theme music, just silence. NBC received 47,000 calls in the next hour, but not complaints. Viewers calling to say they'd witnessed something sacred, something that transcended television. For the next 3 weeks, Johnny didn't do the show. Guest hosts covered without explanation beyond, "Johnny is attending to a family matter." But everyone who'd watched that night knew. Johnny was with his father, making up for 30 years in the 22 days Homer had left. They talked, they fished, they sat in silence. Johnny showed him the scrapbooks he'd kept, too. Every letter his father hadn't sent. Every Father's Day card he'd bought but couldn't mail to nowhere. Homer Carson died on October 16, 1978, 24 days after walking onto the Tonight Show stage. Johnny was holding his hand. The last thing Homer said was, "I watched you Monday. Good monologue. They'd managed to laugh together one final time. Johnny returned to The Tonight Show a week after the funeral, opening with, "I've been gone for a month. My father died. We hadn't spoken for 30 years until he walked onto this stage uninvited 4 weeks ago. In those last days, he told me something. Success means nothing if you achieve it alone." So tonight, this show is for Homer Carson, who finally came home. The footage of their confrontation became the most requested Tonight Show clip never officially released. NBC wanted to package it, sell it, submit it for Emmys, but Johnny refused. That wasn't television. That was my life. However, bootleg copies circulated, and it became known as The Night Carson Broke, studied in psychology classes about reconciliation and unresolved trauma. The incident fundamentally changed Johnny. He became more open about his Nebraska roots, his difficult childhood, his father's absence. He established the Homer Carson Foundation, not publicized, discovered only after Johnny's death, which provided counseling for absent fathers trying to reconnect with their children. By 2005, it had helped reunite over 3,000 families. Dick Carson later revealed that Johnny had hired private investigators in the 1960s to find Homer, but always called them off before they succeeded. He was terrified of both finding him and not finding him. Catherine Carson Solomon finally spoke about that night. "Johnny gave us 3 weeks with Dad we never thought we'd have. We all said what needed saying." In Johnny's Malibu home after his death, workers found a room nobody knew existed. It contained 2 walls of scrapbooks. One side was Homer's collection about Johnny, retrieved from his father's YMCA room. The other was Johnny's collection of Father's Day cards never sent, letters never mailed, 30 years of one-sided conversations with a ghost. In the center was the photo from the 1974 Emmys, showing Homer in the balcony, circled in red ink. Below it, Johnny had written, "He was there. He was always there. I just couldn't see him."